All right, well, I think we can get started.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
good everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, to everyone in the U.S. and good morning to those in the Philippines. So thank you for joining us for 3 years of Afsa. This is our third year anniversary for the Association of Filipino Scientists in America. For those that don't know me, my name is Lowell Iparak. I am the executive chair of Afsa, and I will be one of your co-moderators for tonight. And I am here with Justin Pinka. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Justin. I am the documentation committee chair and I'm the other co-moderator for tonight. And I'm happy to join you all today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin. So we once again, if you're just coming in, just please introduce yourself in the chat. Just share your name, where you're calling from, and any sort of professions or affiliations you would like to share. Just to get a nice refresher, this is your first time here. Please state that. If not, if you've been with us for quite some time, if you'd like a refresher of who we are, AFSA is a community of Filipino, Filipina, and Filipinx scientists in America seeking to utilize our collective expertise and resources to support our communities in the Philippines and the United States. So, of course, today we are definitely celebrating Filipinos everywhere, and whatever be in academia, whatever be in industry, in government, in activism, and in organizing. Of course, we want to spend some time to kind of break some ice. We don't want it just to be a kind of a listening session, but for individuals within our group to kind of get to know each other. So we'll be having the next 30 or so minutes to have some networking. And we're gonna have some networking, discuss who we are and what's it like being in your field. And if any of you have any experiences in education, activism, or research, and it's definitely a good avenue to share those kinds of contributions. Um, if conversations are a little wonky, we have some prompt questions that you can share. They are definitely optional, but can be an avenue for some kind of discussions. So given that regard, we're gonna and perfect. So how'd y'all like the networking sessions? Did you meet new people, get to know a little bit about themselves? Some interesting stories that kind of came out, being a scientist to being Filipino and the intersections between? Well, we're definitely gonna get a lot more of that coming up. So in that regard, can y'all see the presentation screen, right? Just want to make sure. Perfect. So I think it's a good idea to kind of give ourselves, for the newcomers and for those who haven't been with us for a while, a nice history of AFSA, kind of very brief. AFSA kind of started out in 2019. A very committed group of undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral scholars in New York City decided to get together and say, yeah, we should definitely make an organization because there are not many Filipino scientist role models that we could be able to tap on as we're kind of going on through our careers. Definitely consider how at this time in-person activity was the primary mode. And so a lot of building in its early days was especially done in person. So AFSA was featured in the Philan magazine in New York. They were featured in the Times, I believe, when they had a webinar that looks at how Filipino scientists are calling for prompt action on climate change. So a little bit of environmental education there. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, of course, everyone was kind of in their rooms, kind of being quarantined and isolated. But ironically, for what this means for AFSA is that we ended up turning into online modality, and we started becoming a lot more national. Just as for context, I came from Florida, and I stayed in Florida before and during the pandemic. And through a lot of social media and publicity, I was able to get into AFSA, as well as many other Filipino scientists. And so where we're at right now, these are some numbers that are picked up earlier this week. We have 211 members in different stages of their science careers, coming from 27 different states and over 50 different fields of science. If you've been with us for quite some time, We changed this map a little bit. We now have registered members in Minnesota, Wisconsin, if not mistaken, Idaho, and probably a few other states somewhere in the Northeast. And just for this year alone, we've had 38 members kind of join in the past year. And so that is a 22% increase in membership. Just for this year alone, this is kind of like our brief report for Afsa in 2022. We have done, with the help of our marvelous executive committee this year, 22 events, which did include, but not limited to, 5 Kamustahans, which are basically these check-in spaces where we also try to invite speakers from various fields to kind of present a little bit about their research. We've had 3 workshops that are geared towards developing technical and professional skills for Filipino scientists to kind of develop their careers. Our last workshop was on CV and resume development, and the one before that was science communication, as well as networking and community building. These workshops stemmed from our current cycle of mentor-mentee programs, where we had, I believe, almost 60 people signed up, paired into 25 different mentor-mentee pairings. And in order to kind of keep track of what Afsa is doing, we do have a running publicity and social media tools that we use, and general meetings to kind of have everyone up to date about what's been happening. What Afsa does, very broadly, is we are an organization that kind of pairs together mentoring, professional development, and advocacy. It is such a tall order, of course. But just to kind of show what we did this year, we definitely use our voices to serve our communities. Just looking at a glance, these are some of the flyers of events that we've done this year. The Philippine elections in this year kind of played a substantial role in how we did our programming. So even before the elections, we've paired with ACAM, Advocates for Science and Technology in the Philippines, around January for a 2-hour discussion, educational discussion on the Philippine situation through a scientific lens. When the election results were reported, our members definitely felt all sorts of emotions, as well as needs about how to move forward. So we set ourselves a check-in space to kind of check in with each other, and see how we could definitely move forward as a Filipino scientist community, which then kind of emanated to another collaborative event between Afsa and Balaya, inviting scientists and professionals to look from a fact-based and data-driven perspective about the national situation in the Philippines in history and numbers. So that in itself was one way that Afsa has used their voices. We also use our voices to collaborate with other organizations. The first half of Afsa, we collaborated with CFAM to have, if I recall correctly, 4 to 5 different Kamustahan sessions where we've invited guest speakers in looking at how they did their science with COVID-19. This could be ranged from the biomedical to the molecular to the social and public health aspects. And so we're able to get different perspectives of COVID-19 from different Filipino scientists, that to kind of show about the research that they were doing. And we have collaborated a bit with PASE. So here we invited a PASE member, Dr. Mario Santo Domingo, as one of our panelists for our workshop for networking and community building. And I believe it's kind of up on YouTube if I'm not mistaken, but Afsa and PASE definitely did a really nice PASE fireside chat where we kind of explained a more in-depth history of Afsa and what we could learn from the 40 plus years of PASE to kind of build collaboration and learn from each other from different stages of organizational building. And of course, finally, we use our voices to take action. As soon as the new executive committee last year started developing, we've heard about Typhoon Odette. So we paired out with NAFCON, National Alliance of Filipinos for Concerns, to rally up donations for disaster relief in the Philippines. Something that we will elaborate later is that we've developed a solidarity statement. The current president of the Philippines, Bongbong Marcos, visited New York City, and there were some trials and tribulation that has happened, and we are asking members of Afsa and allies and other community members to kind of sign up in solidarity with us to kind of drop the charges against the Maki Beki New York City 3 that has been using their voices to advocate very peacefully and nonviolently what's been happening in the Philippines and the like. And so this is just a nice little scoop of one of the many aspects of our programming that AFSA has been doing. And now we're going to be transitioning on to our speakers. So Justin, would you like to take the floor on that?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lowell. And I realize now, one thing we did forget, we had our nice map of like the states, but we're actually international, despite the fact that we have a word America in our name, because we also had a lot of members join from across Europe and Asia, especially like our kababayan at home, right? So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Flo, which if you want to put up your slide now, but Flo is a marine biology professor over at the University of Pepperdine in Malibu, California. And a lot of her work is about coastal communities and how we, or how the environment impacts it. And she'll be presenting a lot of her work throughout your life, right? And with that, Flo, you can take the floor.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm trying to make you all visible on my side screen. I like to pretend like I'm talking to real people. Okay. It'll be awkward, but it's okay. All right. Awesome. So thank you so much to everyone, Lowell, Justin, for inviting me. I'm really excited and grateful to be here and talking a little bit about my story. So yes, as Justin said, I'm a professor of marine biology at Pepperdine University. It took a long time to get here, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. Ooh. Can you see my cursor, by the way? Okay, great. I have a tendency to do a lot of this. I'm sorry. I'll try not to. So let's start from the beginning. My family, I was raised by my mom's family, and she's one of 8 children. We're originally from Taguig in Manila. And this is all of the siblings together. My mom was the 3rd one, and she was a policewoman during Marcos's time, first Marcos. And she did not like that very much. So she left the country and she wanted to make more money for her family. And so she ended up in Italy, in Rome, specifically, of all places. I was born and raised in Rome. So at home, we spoke Tagalog. With my friends, I spoke Italian, and I went to an international school where I learned English. So from 1st grade to high school, all through high school, I spoke in English. Anyway, so we live on the other end of this bridge, and you can see it's right across from the Vatican. So I was really lucky to grow up in such an interesting place as an immigrant that has its ups and downs, which is a conversation for later maybe. But my mom became a housekeeper for the same family. She just recently retired, actually. And so I grew up with this family, and every summer they would go to their summer vacation house in Ponza, which is a little island between the coast, off of the coast between Rome and Naples. And this is really where I learned how to swim. I've never had a swim lesson in my life. Just got thrown off a boat to figure out how to swim. And it's really where I realized that my favorite pastime is looking underwater. And over time, my aunts also came to Italy. This is my Aunt Flori. She was a nun. Our family is very Catholic and very attached to our faith. And this is my Aunt Beth, who now lives in DC, but she taught me to be mindful of, social justice And she did a lot of work with women's rights in the Philippines and also in the States and in Italy. And this is my aunt, Wenny, who still is really active in working for rights for immigrants all over Europe. So I grew up with a lot of women who were strong and loud, and hence I too am strong and loud in some ways. So this was kind of how I was raised. I ended up in New York for college. I went to Iona College, which is a small liberal arts school, and I had great mentorship there. I knew I wanted to go to a small school because I'd been to small schools all my life, and I was able to get a lot of research experience as an undergrad, which was great. I spent one summer at the Mohonk Preserve in upstate New York, right here. And this was where I was first introduced to real naturalists. So people who knew exactly everything about this place. They knew when things would reproduce, when plants would flower, when the peregrine falcons would come in. It was amazing. And it's not surprising, I don't think, that I'm an ecologist right now, because I found that to be a superpower. Yes, so that was New York. And then right after I graduated, I actually became a teacher. I sort of fell into teaching. I wanted to take a break, even though everyone wanted me to apply to grad school. But really, realistically, I couldn't afford to be poor for that long yet. So I got a real job. I was a teacher. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at an all-girls Catholic school. These are my 6th graders, showing you that different solutions have different densities. And it was a great time. But I knew that I wanted to continue research, and I knew I wanted to watch my students become researchers and become scientists. So I knew I had to go back to grad school. So when you're applying to grad school, you have to figure out what your interests are. And what I had thought about for a long time, even though I'd never taken a marine biology class, was how do we affect our coastal systems, right? I lived in all these cities that were really developed and were coastal. And so there was obviously some effect of all of this in the waters around it. So I decided to study pollutants and nutrients and how they affect biological coastal organisms. I started my PhD at University of Hawaii at Manoa. So this is on Oahu. And this is my lab right here, Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And I learned so much about coral reef ecology. I started an undergraduate program. I helped with a citizen science program that taught teachers how to get their students to collect real data that we then published. But maybe the best part about it was getting to work with Indigenous people and practitioners of traditional ecological knowledge. I don't think I'd be the type of scientist that I am today if I hadn't had that experience. I'm not going to talk about that work today because we don't have time, but if you ever are curious about it, just shoot me an email. And then what I will spend time talking about is my first postdoc, which I did at UC Berkeley. And it was a collaboration with MSI, or Marine Science Institute, at UP Diliman. And I think somebody here is from Diliman. I think Jester, maybe. Yeah. So yeah, I'll tell you more about this collaboration. It was a year long, the year before the pandemic. And by the way, I didn't want to do a postdoc after a PhD. I knew I was ready to be a professor. I had worked already for 5.5 years to get this degree, and I wanted to do it. But realistically, nowadays you need a postdoc in order to be a professor. And so this is the one postdoc I applied to. And I only applied to it because it seemed like it was written for me. They wanted a marine ecologist who worked with sensors, which is part of what I did as a PhD. And they wanted somebody who could do field work in the Philippines. So it made sense for me. And then, of course, after that postdoc, I took another postdoc. And I had a job aligned at this time. Like, I had another offer of an actual tenure track position in Florida, but I didn't take it because I wasn't sure that I wanted to go or to settle in Florida. So I decided to take this other postdoc because I knew, Scripps, at least for marine biologists, Scripps is a really great institution. A lot of great scientists have come out of it. So I knew it would open up a lot of doors for me, and especially in California. And I started this job 1 month before the pandemic. So this was actually, it was really lucky that this was the position that I got, because this was mostly data science. So I worked for California Sea Grant and Southern California Coastal Ocean Observing System, which basically collects a lot of chemical and physical oceanography data. And I collated that with a bunch of long-term monitoring programs around all of the marine protected areas in California. And this was for the decadal assessment of California's MPA network, which is ongoing right now. And so because I didn't have to collect the data myself or go out for field work, this was a good project to do during the pandemic when we were all remote. So yeah, I won't talk about this either, but we created this cool application which shows you all this data, and you could use for research purposes. And these are the links to that if you're interested. And now finally, I'm at Pepperdine, which is in Malibu, California. It's a primarily undergraduate institution, but my lab really functions like I treat my students like grad students, essentially. And except that I hold their hand a lot more than I would with grad students. But it's been so great to, watch them become scientists. We do a lot of work in the intertidal and just kelp forests in California, but I have a still ongoing branch of research in the tropics in Hawaii specifically. So I took some of them to Hawaii last summer, and I'm probably going to do that again this summer. Okay, so I'll tell you about the work I did in the Philippines. So it was a collaboration between UC Berkeley and MSI, and we were funded by PCARI, which is the Philippine California Advanced Research Institutes, which is essentially a collaboration between the Filipino government and the UC schools, where they come together, and really UC and UP schools work together to gain technologies that will help build capacity for Filipino communities. And a lot of the money goes to agriculture, medicine, data science. So I know that we're from all sorts of different fields here, so something to look into if you're at the UC. But ours, I think, was maybe the first one of the marine and aquatic sciences proposals. Okay, I'm gonna admit Aldwin. Okay, and then what we did with that money is really we bought a autonomous surface vehicle, which is fancy for a wave glider, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. But we wanted to use it to monitor for environmental health in 3 different sites in the Philippines. Oops. Okay, it was a very big project. This is our team in the Philippines, so everyone in here. And then there was me, our PIs, but none of them were marine scientists, and I was the only marine ecologist. And then we had a bunch of undergrads who were amazing. So I was the main liaison, and I was the one to go and do field work in the Philippines. It was so fun. It was so great. Okay, this is the wave glider, and it's essentially a souped up surfboard. It's autonomous, so we can drive this thing from anywhere in the world, even when there's no reception. It has satellite, like we can communicate with it through satellite. It's expensive, but we could do that. And it's essentially a platform for many different types of sensors. So there's a weather station, you can get wave data, you can get physical oceanography data. So that's mainly salinity, temperature, and depth. We could get acoustic data. This is usually used for marine mammal research, but we were using it to look at the ability of this technology to monitor for illegal vessels in Tubataha. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And then we also have all this these sensor for looking at water quality and say sewage spills. And then we also had cameras on it so we could take pictures of whatever it was looking at. Okay, so 3 sites. Our first site was Boracay, and you probably all know this place, you know, party island of the Philippines. And I don't know if you knew this, but in 2018, it got closed by the government because tourism had increased exponentially, and really there was no infrastructure to deal with the sewage at this on this island. And so it was really cool. We got to sample this place during the closure and after the reopening as well. And we looked at things like sewage outfall pipes. So we knew where the sewage was. We could take data. We could get the glider to go around and collect data, you know, day and night. And then we could come up with things like these models, which tell you where the sewage is going, depending on where in the water column you're discharging. And I didn't mention it earlier, but on the west side of the island is the part of the island that has all those white sand beaches. And so you can see there's certain times of the day where that discharge ends up on those beaches. And that can be a health hazard, right? And so these are the things that we were looking into there. Our second side was Tubataha. These are coral atolls. So basically, I'm not going to go into coral reef ecology too much, but basically a ring of coral reefs, very well known for divers because it's super beautiful biodiversity. There's tons of sharks there, tons of whale sharks. It's really great. And the managers of that place were really interested in looking at using the glider for environmental monitoring, that person, and then also for looking at effectiveness of the MPA boundary. So meaning there's all these recreational vessels going there, but how far from the atolls do they need to discharge their sewage in order to not have an effect on the coral reefs over here? And unfortunately, I couldn't do this project because I ended up getting the job at Scripps, and also because we had so many delays with getting the wave glider out of customs. It was stuck in customs for 6 months. More on that later. And then, but we did look at this, and we did use the hydrophone to listen for vessels, and you could take pictures of things. But the reality is that this piece of equipment is so expensive that leaving it out in open ocean is not really feasible for long periods of time. But still, it could be used, you know, sometime in the future, maybe when we've done a lot of other cool stuff with it first. Okay. And then the last site is in Bolinao, which is pretty well known. You see all of these squares, they are mariculture pens. So farmers are, you know, enclosing fish in there and growing it. And the ecological issue with that is that when you put too much fish feed in the water and it's not getting eaten by all the fish, we get excess nutrients from it, which causes harmful algal blooms or any algal bloom. And then because of that, you know, when that algae dies, you know, bacteria will eat it and basically deplete the oxygen levels in the water column, which is bad for anything that requires oxygen to live. So you end up having fish kills, which is not good for the farmers. So we looked at dissolved oxygen in this area, and we found that yes, the further down you go, because there's less water flow here, you get less oxygen available for any organism that's trying to live there. Okay, how are we doing time? I'm so over. Okay. I learned a lot of lessons about bureaucracy. Anytime that anyone, you know, complains about doing permitting here, I'm like, it could be worse. So the customs people held our wave glider for 6 months, so we couldn't do work with it for 6 months. And then we had to pay taxes on it while it was in customs. And then anytime we needed permits, we had to be there in person. And so it just was a lot of using of resources to just be able to do the work. But at the same time, it was so cool to be able to be a part of the first automated oceanographic observing in the Philippines. And it's really exciting to watch marine biology in the Philippines in general, because in many ways, it's still so new and there's so much to learn still. And there's so much diversity in the coral reefs there. Okay, some current work. I look at fish health behavior inside and outside marine protected areas. Actually, my student does. We look at toxins from harmful algal blooms and how they affect sea lion strandings in California, because we know, especially in Southern California, we have a lot more sea lions just confused and dying. And it's because of this toxin called domoic acid that's from harmful algal blooms. So we're trying to create a model that will predict where these strandings will happen. My students are also looking at plastic pollution and what settles on plastic pollution, so algae and invertebrates. And we're actually looking at whether these barnacles are more structurally sound or not than the ones that just grow on the pylons or on, on substrates that are in that area naturally. And then, of course, I want to continue my temperate and tropical work and my coastal projects, but really I'm also very interested in trying to bring back communities that have been displaced along this coastline. And I'm really excited for the new generation of Filipino marine scientists. So if you have any questions, just feel free to email me at my email address. It doesn't have to be about marine science. I'm happy to talk to anyone about next steps. And I just want to acknowledge everybody that I talked about in this presentation, all the students and my family, especially because it wouldn't have been possible without them, and all my funders and collaborators. And I went over time. I'm so sorry. Thanks.
Oh, that's totally fine. I mean, this was all amazing work, and I feel like I was getting recruited into marine ecology. Yeah, thank you so much, Flo, for all of that. I mean, especially, besides for all that work that you're doing, Bakari, just generally all the monitoring that you're doing, it shows that you're constantly like caring about like your local community. And I say local, but you've been to so many places and you've always been involved in it. That's so amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, come to the dark side.
Yes, well, I'm gonna have to hit you up at a future time because I definitely want to talk more about the exciting research that you're doing and some of the lessons that you've learned. But now we will definitely move on to the next speaker. And our next speaker is Dr. Joe Cuello. Dr. Joe Cuello is a member of PASE. So if you definitely want to be part of a greater community of Filipino scientists in both the Philippines and the US, definitely should contact him. But Dr. Cuello is also a professor of biosystems engineering and at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona, and the vice chair of the International Association for Vertical Farming. Joel is a globally recognized expert on cutting-edge technologies for sustainable biological and agricultural systems. And so Joel, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lowell. And again, thanks to you and Justin and all the organizers for this event. I'm happy and I'm glad to be here. And Flo, thank you for your very inspiring talk. I really appreciated your global personal and professional odyssey. Thank you. And congratulations on your position currently. So I really appreciated the theme of this anniversary event. I don't know who came up with that, but Punlaan is really, really wonderful. So I titled my presentation as From Punlaan to Science Diplomacy to Community Building. So first, I'm going to give you a flavor of what I do in terms of my research. As professor at the University of Arizona, I teach And I also do research. And of course, research occupies quite a bit of my time. And so it drives my teaching, it informs my teaching, it informs my outreach, which is global in scope. And so I just want to give you an idea in terms of what I'm doing in research, and then I'm going to talk about science diplomacy. So my work is actually part of an urgent planetary grand challenge, and that is food. And of course, today, food is important because the global population is increasing. I'm not going to give you details on that. And it's taking place within the era and within this global arrangement, which is known as globalization. But at the same time, globalization right now is suffering because it's been disrupted by the global pandemic. And now there's a war between Russia and the Ukraine, and that has really essentially damaged globalization as we've known it in the past 40 years. I am confident that globalization will continue on, but certainly this current war is going to modify it and alter it in certain fundamental ways. And we still have to know what those changes are. And of course, we're living in the era of climate change, which is really disrupting so much, not just climate, but also food production, the global supply chain, and many other types of industries as well. And of course, that has direct impact in terms of how we live, and the folks in emerging economies are very much impacted by it as well. So there are two areas of research that I'm focusing on. One is on vertical farming, the other one is alternative proteins. And these are directly addressing the challenge of food, essentially, that we need to, for instance, we need to increase our food production by 70% by the middle of the century, for one thing. So we can't rely on traditional agriculture only because it's already using up significant resources in terms of water, in terms of energy, in terms of land. It's already using almost half of the habitable land on the entire planet. So if we're going to increase our food production by 70% in the next 28 years, there's not enough input resources to be able to meet that demand. The only way we could meet that is by innovating. So we still have traditional agriculture, but on top of that, or in addition to that, we need innovative ways of producing food, and one of which is vertical farming. This is I would say, an iconic picture of a vertical farm in Japan, where essentially you have a warehouse, you control the environment, the temperature, the relative humidity, the light in terms of intensity, in terms of quality, in terms of photo period. You deliver the nutrients using liquid, there's no soil involved. End result, you're able to really optimize your crop productivity or yield, as well as the quality of the crops in terms of appearance, morphology, food flavor, or flavor profile, as well as other characteristics. This is a commercial vertical farm in New Jersey. These are my students or past students, and we have a shipping container that represents really a type of vertical farming, a modular type of vertical farm. So we retrofitted this to be a vertical farm, not for commercial production, but for instruction as well as research. And students are always happy whenever they're inside this shipping container turned vertical farm, because they see these green things that are growing. Anyway, we developed our own original growing systems, and right now we have about 3 or 4 such growing systems that the University of Arizona has applied patents for, including this we call the Live Grow Bot, where you have the hydroponic system that is sitting on top of a mover bot that you can program. So this is completely hands-off. You can program them to move to I don't know, the planting room, the growing room, the harvesting room, and it can be completely automated. These are senior engineering students who worked on prototyping the algae bot, which they did last spring as part of their capstone engineering design project, and they did it. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture here right now. But anyway, vertical farming is an offshoot of the space program of NASA, and also the space program of the former Soviet Republic. And I did my postdoctoral fellowship as a U.S. National Research Council postdoctoral fellow at NASA Kennedy Space Center. So that was a long time ago in the past century, but I worked on the closed ecological life support system division at Kennedy. So this is essentially developing a closed bioregenerative system so that astronauts in the future for long duration crewed mission on the moon or on Mars would be able to be sustained in terms of their human lives. So they need food, they need water, they need energy, and they have to have a way of recycling everything that they emit as waste and regenerate those to the things that they need, such as food. So we developed this nutrient delivery system that is original and that's been patented by the University of Arizona. And this is the space station. And of course, water behaves at zero gravity in a weird way, if you will, because gravity is no longer the dominant force acting on water, but it's surface tension. And so your bulk water breaks up into these spheres that are floating around and essentially will not move unless you apply an external force on it. And of course, that's not going to work for growing plants at zero gravity. And so we designed our own nutrient delivery system to make that happen by using liquid emitters as well as air emitters. And of course, we have to synchronize their movement and their emission so that the emitted nutrients will have direct physical contact with the roots. The roots will have a chance to assimilate the nutrients contained in that water, and then the water spheres can be moved forward downstream and can be recycled. Anyway, I had another group or team of senior engineering students at the University of Arizona who worked on prototyping this, and they did that as well. So right now, one of the recent projects that I'm involved in is with my industry colleagues, Matteo Pietrobelli and Mackenzie McAleer. We designed the Boring Vertical Farm. It's an acronym for the Burrowing and Regenerative In-Ground Vertical Farm that is meant for the moon, Mars, and beyond. So the other area of research that I work on is on alternative proteins. In relation to this, we designed original bioreactors that, again, the University of Arizona patented with me and with my grad students as co-inventors. And you can use this for growing whatever type of cells, bacterial cells, fungal cells. In this case, we're growing microalgal cells. And we're growing them because depending on the species, they produce high-value products, including nutraceuticals, proteins, cosmetic ingredients, animal feed, and pharmaceuticals as well. This is a company that is based in Singapore, and they are producing this algae-based meat. So it's not meat, but it is configured to be something like meat. So it's a burger patty, but it's made of microalgae. These are crab cakes, not made of real crabs, but again, of microalgae. And in a way, they're more nutritious than the original thing. So anyway, let's go back to the main topic or the theme of this third anniversary of Afsa, Punlaan. So Punlaan is the Tagalog word for sowing. And of course, a sower is the one who sows. I was looking for a painting by Amor Solo, who is a famous Filipino painter, but unfortunately, he didn't have any painting regarding this theme. But this is by Van Gogh, and I think he painted this around late 1800s or 1889. And he's one of my favorite modern artists. So the question is, with what do we sow? All right. With what do we sow? We sow with what we know. And second, we sow with what we do. And then we also sow with what we are. So as scientists, of course, we acquire knowledge. And in fact, we create knowledge. But we can't really separate. We can't divorce what we know with what we are. Because what we know is based on how we know, and how we know depends on what we are. The same thing with what we do. We can't separate what we do with how we do, because how we do is a part of what we are. So what we are, so whether you're Filipino, Filipina, Filipinx, that has a lot to do with what you do and what you know. And as scientists, as engineers or entrepreneurs or social scientists, we are very much enmeshed with this, with our knowing, with our doing, which are all very much anchored on what we are. So based on what we are, we actually have a lot of things that we can share and impart to the rest of the world. And as scientists and engineers and so on and so forth, we are not knowing and we are not doing and we're not being who we are or what we are just for our self-satisfaction. It's actually for service. And one service that one could render as a scientist is science diplomacy. And it's directed toward community building. So as scientists, engineers, economists, entrepreneurs, we all become de facto global ambassadors for innovation, progress, development, mutual understanding, mutual respect, and peace. And all of these are directed toward building communities. It could be local, could be regional, could be national, it could be global communities. So I want to share with you, I've been a professor now for 27 years. I'm not retiring yet. I'm not thinking about that. I'm still really having fun and enjoying what I'm doing. But I want to share with you some of the outreach or global service that I have rendered and still rendering, which really makes being a scientist and engineer really satisfying because through what I know and through what I do, I'm able to serve and I'm able to help. And that's the essence of science diplomacy. And of course, that's very much connected to and linked to what I am as a person. So in the West Bank, I've had a long relationship with Palestine in the West Bank, I would say for the last 15 years now. I was first invited there as a keynote speaker at a conference, but then they kept inviting me initially in Hebron at Palestine Polytechnic University. They have a biotechnology center there. So they would invite me pretty much every other year, every 2 years, to give lectures and to guide the grad students who were enrolled in that center. And then eventually, about 5 years ago, I was invited to this national conference in the West Bank in Ramallah by their Higher Council for Innovation and Excellence. And the director is this gentleman here to my left. And this center is really, or this higher council is really meant for national innovation to address practical problems in the West Bank. And this was in cooperation with one of the universities, Al-Quds Open University. And so I got to train a lot of the grad students who were interested. In this case, we were growing algae in bioreactors for using that algae as an ingredient for animal feed, because the price of animal feed in the West Bank has gone up astronomically. They don't have all of the ingredients that they need to be able to make their own animal feed. And so they're trying to do that. And as a protein source, it would be from spirulina, which is a type of cyanobacteria. So I helped them establish this lab and also to train the personnel and the grad students. Anyway, at one point that I was in the West Bank, I was invited to visit the mayor of Bethlehem during Christmas time. And so he was there with his council members. It was interesting because this happened around 2017, and that was the time when former President Donald Trump unilaterally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And that was a problem politically. By the way, when I go there, I don't engage in politics. It's really for science. But just to give you the backdrop, so the Palestinians were counting on East Jerusalem to be their future capital for a nation of Palestine. But of course, with the US president recognizing the entire city of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, of course, they were not happy. At that time in December, the vice president, Mike Pence, was supposed to visit Bethlehem, but of course he was disinvited. So I could sense that the mayor was really frustrated and angry with that. And so what he was supposed to, this sash that he was supposed to confer to the vice president, he conferred it to me. So this goes back to the matter of identity. Of course, they welcomed me there as an American, but not a regular American, but as a Filipino American. And with that, they were happy with me. So it was an honor. Anyway, Saudi Arabia is another country that I've been involved with for a long time now, for many years, in terms of research collaboration, as well as outreach. And this is mainly through King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, or CACS. It's not a real city, it's a figurative city. It's like the counterpart of the National Science Foundation and the NIH combined, and the Department of Education in the United States. They give all of the funding for research in the entire kingdom through this ministry, essentially. But anyway, their president at that time was a graduate of Stanford. And so they arranged for us to visit provinces in Saudi Arabia where we could talk with the growers and then interview them in terms of what were their challenges, and therefore come up with the best innovative solution that could be offered to them to help them with their challenges. But anyway, and they're very hospitable as well. And so every time we went, they would provide this feast, essentially. But it was a very wonderful experience as well. They're very warm people. People in the Middle East, the first time I remember when I went there, was so afraid, but it turned out they're some of the warmest people on earth. Anyway, China, again, I've had a long history with China now, over 20 years. And Zhejiang University is one of the elite universities in China, one of probably top 4. And they conferred to me a lifetime visiting professorship. So I would normally go there in December, stay there for about a week, again, give lectures, give advice to their grad students, and so on and so forth. But that stopped, of course, because of the pandemic. So this was the last time I was there. This was probably 2018 or 2019. And Hangzhou is the city where the university is located, and that's where the headquarters of Alibaba is located. So I had a tour of the facility of Alibaba, which really felt like Silicon Valley in many ways, and in terms of the atmosphere and the outlook. Germany, I have a long relationship with Germany as well as with Europe in general. This was in Hamburg because they're interested in establishing a research/demonstration center for the new food systems, with meat cultures and vertical farming and so on and so forth. And so that was a great involvement. I'm still involved with them in terms of planning for and hopefully implementing that center. Panama, I was there earlier this year. And this is in relation to the sufferings that their growers are experiencing, the disruption because of the changing climate. The growers really cannot grow what they used to grow, and so now they have to go indoors. So vertical farming, and again, that's my expertise. That's why they invited me. This is part of the campus of the University of Panama in Panama City. And we were there because that's the site where they're going to erect the facility, including a building, to house a center, again, for promoting vertical farming, not only in Panama, but also for the rest of South America and even the Caribbean. And because that's where Panama Canal is, then we're thinking about having economic free zones as well related to promoting vertical farming throughout the entire hemisphere. And of course, the Philippines. The Philippines, of course, is always special. But unfortunately, the Philippines is suffering the brunt of the changing climate. This one is in the southern part in Mindanao. This was in 2012, and this was signal number 5, Super Typhoon Pablo. When I was in the Philippines, the typhoons there were only categorized into 3 signals, 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the strongest. But now there's signals 4 and 5, which is amazing. And this is a satellite view of that super typhoon crossing over Mindanao. And now growers in that part of the country, in fact, pretty much all over the country, are now complaining about the weather because of excessive heat and excessive rain. This part in Mindanao, in Bukidnon, they're able to grow these vegetables like green pepper and others. in the open air, but now they can't do that anymore. They have to have a rudimentary structure, like a rudimentary greenhouse, to be able to do the same thing. And then, of course, there is Leyte, and my collaboration right now with the Philippines is through the province of Leyte, and that's the province where Eastern Visayas State University is. And I'm currently doing remotely my Balik scientist stint with that university, as supported by the Department of Science and Technology of the Philippines. And I'm sure you've heard and you know that about 10 years ago now, 9 years ago, Super Typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda, basically buffeted the Philippines, and it really resulted in massive destruction and killing hundreds of people. However, fortunately, now they have recovered, and now there are many farmers associations all over Leyte, the province. There's about 200 of them. Oh, and there's an interesting backstory to this, because a lot of these growers who are part of this farmers associations, they used to be part of the National People's Army rebel groups, but they surrendered to the government, and the government enticed them with providing them with training and organizing them and linking them to the market so they would become self-reliant. This is one of the farmers associations. But anyway, the research project that I'm working on for Leyte at Eastern Visayas State University is developing this low-cost modular type of vertical farm. We refer to it as eco-vertibox. So it's using locally based materials. It's designed to be low energy demand, and it's going to be smart because we're using some smart sensors as well. And we are patenting this. I'm giving up my rights to the patent, so it's going to go over to the university on condition, of course. My condition is that they make this available for free of charge to growers in Leyte, as well as all over the Philippines. These are some of my colleagues or counterparts at Eastern Visayas State University. Weekly, we meet twice a week. I was able to visit, when was that? Over the summer. And I'll have a chance to meet with some of them, but in another location, because I've been invited to a conference in the Philippines soon. And, you know, it's not just the university, but we were connected with the governor of the province, as well as the officials of the Department of Science and Technology, and to some extent, the Department of Trade and Industry as well, within that region. So we really are designing this to be not just a project that we want to offer the farmers. We really would like to design this in a way that eventually we hope that this will become a technology innovation ecosystem in the province. So it will be commercialized at the same time that it's being made available free of charge to the farmers, but it will result in significant economic activities within the province. And then on the national level in the Philippines, I'm coordinating and consulting with the Department of Agriculture, again, for a national program for indoor farming, vertical farming, and I'm introducing the new food systems as well for the Philippines through the Department of Agriculture. So this is an ongoing conversation. I'm happy with them. So again, with what do we sow? We sow with what we know. That's where we start. We sow with what we do, and ultimately we sow with what we are. And what we are is for service. What we are is for community building. I really like this quotation from Barack Obama. This is not the most famous part of his quotation. It's actually the one after this. But this is the one that I really like. We are the ones we've been waiting for. The one after this is be the change that you want to be. And that's a more famous part of the phrase, but I think that this is the one that really is appropriate. We are the ones we've been waiting for. I understand that Filipino Americans who were born and raised here, sometimes it's very hard for them to find the proper role model and to identify with, particularly in the sciences. So it's tough. It definitely is tough. But at the same time, you have to look to yourself. Because we are the ones we've been waiting for. All right, well, with that, I think that's the last one. So this is my contact information. You're welcome, of course, to contact me. I hope I didn't go over time. Probably I did. Sorry about that. But thank you.
Thank you, Joel. And I'm gonna be sharing my screen here. There you go. I think it's really interesting to see how your science has been like incorporated from like a global perspective. And maybe we could dig a little deeper during the question and answer about, some of the trials and tribulations that you've had with, integrating your science for the community. So I definitely look forward to more of your knowledge and wisdom regarding that.
Okay.
All right, Justin, would you like to pass it on?
Yeah. And this is our third speaker, Gabriel Tung. So Gabe serves as the Associate Director for the Office of Human and Civil Rights, Equity and Governance of the New Jersey Education Association. That's always a long one to say, but he's held so many positions over his career, and he's always been a champion of racial justice, equity, and advocacy in both the workplace and our education system. And so with that, I'd like him to take the floor. You ready, Gabe?
Ready to go. Also, thank you for the introduction and appreciate the space. Wanted to start off with just an acknowledgement of how powerful the speakers have been thus far. I am learning so much, and also just appreciate being able to share the space with you all. The teacher in me actually wanted to start off to make sure that there's some engagement. So if there's something that resonated with you from that previous speaker or the previous speakers, I'd love for you to lift it up in the chat. You could do it in a synthesis point, maybe one line or one question or one statement that resonated with you, so that we make sure that we get the thoughts out there and generating. Also during my part, I'd love to just use the chat as a back channel for questions, and we'll make sure that this is more of a dialogue and as engaging as possible. That said, I actually wanted to kick off with a little share of a little poetry that I would call it poetry, but a little story that I presented recently at a conference for the New Leaders Council in Philadelphia in July. And it brings in and weaves in some of my identity as a Filipino American, but also some of the activism and why it's so important in this moment that young Filipinos in particular, who are self-aware, self-conscious, and in a way, or growing in their critical consciousness. Let me reframe that. Growing in their critical consciousness of self, are understanding how important it is that we collectively lean into this moment of crisis. And even thinking about the last speaker and the different ways that the global context of the crises that we're facing are feel so large. And that just means that we have to meet that moment with even more courage and inspiration and resolve and resilience. So first and foremost, again, a refresher. If there's something that resonated with you from the previous speakers, lift it up in the chat and allow me to just share something that introduces myself and hopefully connects with you all. I wanted to start off with a conversation around liberatory education. And I recognize that I'm speaking to a group of future science activists, and that's such an important frame, the activist portion. So I want to speak to the activism, particularly with the liberatory education as a frame. So I wrote this as a love letter to my unborn baby on the way. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, and you are mine. You, my future child, are due to arrive on December 4th, the day the great Black Panther leader Fred Hampton joined the ancestors far too soon, the same day the greatest rapper of all time was born in the Marcy Projects of Brooklyn, New York City. So allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Gabe, G to the A-B, but I digress. My name is Gabriel Anthony Tung. Our last name means light, as in light a fire to blaze a trail, lighten hearts and enlighten minds. Let the bright dreams of our future children shine. The roots of our Filipino ancestors run deep, from the first Asian migrants to touch the shores of North America, to the legendary boxer Manny Pacquiao and musical artist Her winning her first Grammy. From the tribesmen that defeated Magellan to the farm workers that organized the labor movement. You are a descendant of greatness. From our wayfinding cousins boldly navigating the Pacific Islands to the great Filipino revolutionary generals like Gabriel Tung. This conversation is about my journey toward liberatory education and collective action. It is my love letter to you. From the classroom at Bergenfield High School to dozens of cities around the country, I've been in community with some of the dopest, game-changing, unionized public educators fighting for a better world. You see, liberatory education is not simply an academic concept, my love. Liberatory education is a constant learning, practice, struggle, movement, and discipline. It is a lifestyle of self-love at its finest. So when the oppressive systems try to impose their colonial ways into your K-12 education with Eurocentric curriculum, punitive policies that disproportionately impact you and your Black, brown, indigenous, queer, and other historically marginalized cousins, it's your titas, titos, aunties, uncles, and our comrades that are in community held together by our labor union, resisting, strategizing, and building a movement for racial, social, economic, and environmental justice, with the hope that by the time you arrive, you will inherit a better world. You see, my passion as a unionized educator helped me realize that collective power by organized labor, when channeled for good, we can make a difference. So I remember at my first representative assembly, voting on the historic new business item that caused the NEA, the largest union in the country, to confront institutional racism throughout our US public education system. I've been putting in work for you, for your arrival, and all the people listening on this call, the new leaders across the country, are all people that will help build this movement for justice. So, to help protect and uplift you and your generation, I'm actually going to invite the folks that are listening on this Zoom right now to list in the chat, what is the one issue in your lifetime that you would like to address, confront, and solve? What is the one issue that you would like to confront, address, or solve within your lifetime? So at this point, I will take a moment to unpack some of that, but I did want to make sure to acknowledge that those of you who are participating in the chat, just so grateful. I want to lift up some of the things that were mentioned. Filipino, Filipina, Filipinx, ingenuity as a summary statement. That's a beautiful frame. Jester, thank you for that. And it's from the previous speakers. It's interesting to think about our role as scientists and advocates and how those two roles overlap. Flo, I see you. And loving the reminder to serve as a motivation for scientists. So I see some of that coming up. So really appreciate those shares, and just taking a moment to get into more story mode rather than presentation and performance mode. That poem or speech or whatever you want to call the format, it was something that I've been really intentional about throughout my journey as an educator, that has been, if I'm being honest and vulnerable, as a Filipino American who, for some, have parents that value assimilation, right? Assimilation into American society more than grounding in my own history and knowledge and self-awareness. As a high school educator, I still had work to do in understanding some of the things that I even mentioned in that. So from the first Filipinos to touch the shores of North America, it's a fun fact and interesting to know that the Filipino sailors that landed in Morro Bay on the West Coast were arriving in North America 33 years before the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth Rock. Learning about, in my 5th grade class, invited to research my own history of the Philippines and only finding in the encyclopedia articles on Magellan, right? The European explorer that discovered the Philippines, right? As a disconnect from my own public school education, only to learn about Lapu-Lapu, who was a legendary Filipino chieftain that defeated and killed Magellan in the Battle of Mactan. And all of the revolutionary stories that I haven't known, including some of the Filipino labor organizers that you see in my background here, Philip Vera Cruz and Larry Itliong. As a Filipino educator and union organizer, these are stories that just help ground me in my own resistance. And I know that this audience of innovators, activists, scientists are folks that are perhaps having a different angle. So I hope that some of what I'm sharing is relevant to your own journeys and perception of what you think the work is ahead in changing the world. The examples prior to this, I can't hardly match some of the incredible work that's being done. It's really fascinating to learn about. But what I do bring to this conversation is a level of passion around education, knowledge of self, and what that means in empowering ourselves to own our identity, own our cultural wealth that we bring to spaces, even when it means resistance, even when it means courageous resistance, in addition to the innovative ways that you all will change the world. So I'm going to pause for a beat and take a look back at the chat to make sure that I'm lifting up the issues that you all collectively have named as things that are going to be critical to the future of our country and world. So Cynthia is naming climate change out of the gate, so important. Climate change and environmental justice perhaps is the most critical issue of our moment and our time. Justin mentioning access to education. Absolutely, Justin, I appreciate you lifting that up, in part because that is my life's work and passion, but particularly access to education in the context of a culturally responsive and historically accurate education. It's so important for that knowledge of self, so rare. Along my journeys, though, I will mention that for anybody, and I need to probably take a survey, but if there are folks joining us from the West Coast, there is a liberated ethnic studies movement that's decades deep that do lift up our history differently in public education. That is a really great model for those on the East Coast we can learn more about. But I see food security globally, indeed, compounded by, of course, the climate change. And I appreciate that too, because the vertical growing is, again, a fascinating innovation that is clear that you're on the front lines of, that can change that. Educational dissonance. See, this is a moment where why my teaching style is more about dialogue than it is about direct instruction, because I'm so curious to understand more, Joshua. If you could speak more to that educational dissonance, it sounds like I understand what you mean, but I want to make sure that I'm clear. Co-production of knowledge with indigenous communities, indeed. Mental health, absolutely. Dissonance between the scientific community and our own communities, absolutely. Reclaiming coastal lands and resources, fighting against dis, mal, and misinformation, information disorders. access to healthcare services, construction of the authentic 21st century Filipino identity rooted in the rich Filipino heritage. Absolutely. Obviously, each of these topics could be unpacked so much more. And I'm recognizing that time is of the essence in this conversation. So I'm actually going to pause, because what I've done is try to like briefly introduce some of what I do in a different format, invite some conversation, invite some collective lifting up of the issues that are most relevant to you all. And I could pause there actually for whatever the next transition is of the program, knowing that this is only the beginning of a dialogue. So timing wise, I think I'm on. I think I might be a little bit over, but Justin, I'll refer to you to go back to continue with the program if needed.
Well, the next part is actually to discuss. So you're actually the perfect segue into this, and actually addressing questions and things like that. And so I asked all the speakers to be present. And if you guys have any questions for any of the speakers, please list them now. Just send it in the chat. If you want it to be anonymous, you can send it to Kalai and she will share it with us. Lowell, if you want to start with the questions.
Absolutely. So thank you all. So thank you, Gabriel, for the nice segue into the question answer format. And I think, it's I definitely agree 100% with the need for dialogue and very synthesizing the very complex issues and problems that I think a lot of us are well affected by and probably have a very strong passion to overcome. So given that, want to loosen up a little bit, actually. We can, if it's all possible, that we can have a nice little photo opportunity. So just kind of open your cameras just for very, very briefly. Be able to kind of lighten up a little. Hopefully this will continue to invite some dialogue. So please open up your cameras. Please open up if you can. Wherever you are, wherever you're at. All right. Perfect. Cameras open. Say, do we have everyone putting in their cameras? Cameras opening. Whoops, that's not it. Cameras opening once. Cameras opening twice. Now definitely look. Have a nice sneak and a smile. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you all for that. Now you're free to keep open your cameras or close them. But we are now at the question and answer portion, and the way that we're going to do it is Justin and I will alternate asking questions between the speakers as well as giving general questions that any of the 3 speakers can be able to discuss with. So I think I might do this gallery style, as a matter of fact. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Flo, because I think it's interesting at the beginning of your presentation. Your family has instilled you some values, the need for social justice, perhaps your faith. And how did you bring, if at all, these ideas as you're kind of going through your scientific career? Of course, the marine biology research and education you do not occur in isolation. It's very likely that there will probably have impacts with people that you probably work with, whatever it's in the lab or along in the research sites that you do. So maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Okay, so it felt like growing up, I mean, certainly they didn't show it this way, or present it this way, but I always thought about, okay, well, my life has to have meaning, and what am I gonna put my efforts and talents towards. And it always felt at the beginning, before I was really educated, I'm so sorry about my cat. He only does this when I'm on Zoom. Yeah, sure. You want to be part of this too? And I would say that at first I felt like the green movement or being an environmentalist was kind of a lesser social justice movement, right? it feels that way. It feels bougie in some ways. But I had to get over that. I mean, we know that climate change is our biggest issue of today. We know that it disproportionately affects island nations and developing nations. And I love doing the science, you know, and I love imparting this knowledge and opening people's eyes. And when it comes to faith, this is an interesting one. So I work at Pepperdine University, which is a Christian university. It was founded by Church of Christ, and it's a little bit different than Catholicism in that sense. And, you know, certainly I take with me, you know, how we have to take care of this land. And I think I've always had a connection with just our natural resources. And I think we all probably do on this call, right? More like we're most at home when we're outside, probably, or, you know, that's part of how I express my faith, actually. And I don't know, I'm going on a rant right now, and I'd love for anyone else to chime in, but I don't see the being a professor to me is a vocation. It's a lifestyle, and really, it takes up my entire life anyway because it's so busy, but also just I get to impart, as you said, you know, my values in this work, which is not necessarily true of many other jobs, right? And that I really appreciate. And I have these conversations like this in my classrooms actually a lot. So yeah, I don't know that was a satisfying answer, but it definitely informs who I am as a person and who I am as a professor and a researcher and a mentor.
I think that's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Flo.
Sure.
And I have a question for Joel. I mean, generally, we just like outline a lot of the big issues that we want to face, right? But one thing about like food security, and I guess this also goes for the topic of access to healthcare. It looks like technologically we do have solutions, but like what are the challenges of implementing, right? Like implementing vertical farming into all these different locations that need help with access to food.
Yeah, there are technical challenges, of course. With vertical farming, you control the environment. So essentially, the power of that is you divorce crop production from the impacts of the weather, the geography, the climate, the season. You're able to grow food 24/7, 365 days a year, and you get top quality as well as maximum or optimal yield or productivity. But you have to pay for something to be able to achieve that, and that is energy. Electrical energy, in other words. So that's still a technical matter. Vertical farming at this point is basically thriving in developed countries. But then again, that's the impetus for me to design this low cost but effective type of vertical farming for the Philippines, so that it's going to be low energy demand, but at the same time maintain all of its other advantages, features. And so that's what we are heading for, what we are going for. But on the non-technical side, on the social side, of course, there's resistance to change. There's resistance to adapting new innovations and technologies on the part of the growers. But on the other hand, they're experiencing firsthand the significant impact of the changing climate. And a lot of growers right now all over the world really are disoriented because when they don't know when to plant because of the disrupted weather patterns or climate patterns. So that really drives them as well to go for solutions, even if it means, you know, innovations that are just starting to emerge. So that really opens their mind in a way.
Right. I'm glad that your work like always is about like opening the mind, right? It's like you've always are on the cutting edge, right? And it's
you know, there's one quote that I just encountered recently, and I don't even remember to whom it's attributed, but says, pay attention to the cracks because that's where the light gets through. I thought that was very meaningful. Even in human interactions, sometimes you're distracted by I don't know, a person's background or personality, but everybody has cracks. We all have weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and that's where you see the light. That's the opening for you to provide the light. Anyway, it's kind of random, but I just appreciated that.
I mean, I see Gabe reacting. Do you want to comment on that?
I have to comment only because the
Please.
timing of hearing that quote again. I'm actually
Uh-huh.
here in Denver for a National Staff Organization conference. And
Oh.
one of the speakers said that exact quote, and it was the first time I heard about it. And in the same weekend, I'm hearing it from you, which
Oh,
feels
wow.
like another reminder, one of those universal reminders, speaking of flows, faith, perhaps,
Yes.
that something is speaking through that. But yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh, and did you want to comment on educational dissonance? Josh commented on it on the chat if you want to check that out.
Absolutely. So also before I would be remiss, Flo said something that also resonated with me that I want to lift back up. It is so rare to be in a profession that allows you to live your values. So that's just something that is really sticking with me, and perhaps a seed that you all should carry and cultivate with you, right? Like that's definitely. So just want to lift that up. But Josh, thank you for clarifying. So for me, educational dissonance is the combination of lack of access to education and problems with how it relates to real world and the communities that surround us. And you go on further. Internet access connecting people to resources is amazing, though I have seen schooling systems continue to push random STEM skills without relating it to anything helpful to personal or community growth. So I hope to improve the humanity in education for especially STEM development. Wow. So what I heard in that response reminds me of first, one of the things in my teaching career, which was focused on economics, education, history as well, but personal finance. So focusing on specifically like the skills that are most relevant that allow you to apply them in the real world. So there's one. But then two, the connection to community. I think the frame that was shared earlier around all of the global larger issues that overlay us remind me of a saying that is often used: think global, act local. Think global, act local. And this whole idea of connecting STEM in particular to having a direct impact on the communities, a direct connection to the communities, and the educational systems that are frankly in some ways designed only in an academic way, not in the heart. So it's like the hearts and minds, right? So I think that's part of the educational dissonance that I see often in, the K-12 public education system. Now, mind you, just to offer some thinking around why that exists, the systems as they're designed and the power structures that promote this style of education, how do I say, the policies aren't designed to be liberatory, right? They're not, and if they were, if educational policies were designed to be liberatory, then they would inherently and implicitly include an exploration that is culturally introspective, right? Promote criticality in ways that challenge the things that we know as the norms that maintain the systems of inequity. The example that was shared earlier by Joel, I'm making sure that I say that name correctly, of like the incentives for the maintenance of inequity. Now I'm going down a rabbit hole and I'm trying not to. So let me just circle myself back to the educational dissonance that I'm demonstrating here. That I appreciate your clarification that education should be directly connected to the community. It should be directly connected to the ways that we can impact and make our communities better. And by doing that, we can have a more global impact. Imagine if K-12 education was designed in that way. let's do it.
Yes.
That's all I got. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Heck yeah, absolutely. And we definitely need to have more of that very culturally introspective approaches, which does lead me to my next question that I think I'm going to ask all three speakers here. Question from Cynthia that I think is going to be really cool, and I know there's some responses in the chat. Anyone can start with this. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger? And that could be a life lesson, that could be something practical.
It could be cooking if you want.
It's a deep question. I have an answer. I guess I wish I knew then the cyclical nature of life. Meaning that not whenever you're having a bad time, it's not going to be forever. If you're in your PhD and it's not going well, or you're in some funk and all your experiments are failing, it's not going to be forever. It will resolve itself. Maybe you'll leave academia, and that's also fine. You know, I think that if I knew that, if I had just a little bit more faith in the process, then I could have slept better at night. You know, but it's hard. It's harder to know that, and it's hard to practice that for sure, you know, and it's hard to just believe it when somebody says that to you, but it's going to be okay.
I guess there's a time for everything in terms of knowing things, realizing things. It happens at the right time. But on the other hand, just to answer your question, I wish I knew much earlier the meaning of human life. Now, to answer that, you know, you could talk about your faith, and I have my own faith, but that's not what I'm talking here. On a more professional level, on a more human level, it's really knowing the purpose of your existence. And to me, I realize it's really about service. Because, you know, when you're growing up, when you're young, you want to have this, you want to have that. You want to have a family, you want to have kids, blah, blah, blah. You want to have the best job. And that could result to self-indulgence, really, or selfishness. But if you realize right away that, and ultimately, by the way, that's not going to satisfy you fully and completely. What's really satisfying is when you serve others, when you become part of a community that in a way is enhanced and is improved through your own contribution of service. There really is nothing more satisfying than that, at least in a human level. So to me, I look at science, I look at engineering, whether it's entrepreneurship as well, or any kind of profession really that one engages in. It's a form of service. And it's important to know the connection in terms of what you do professionally with how that links with being able to serve others, communities, and so on and so forth. That is one of the most satisfying things one could realize and experience.
Just have to acknowledge how absolutely beautiful this question is. And thank you for Cynthia and for this to emerge. So what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger? I would just offer, in addition to Flo and Joel, that when I was younger, I think there's so often getting confronted with situations that challenge you to doubt yourself. And I wish that I would stay more rooted in trusting my instincts, in trusting my gut. And the reason that I think that's important is because being that we are all sharing our own affinity and ancestry, is that the ancestors who were some of the most brilliant, courageous, innovative humans to navigate this planet. And that's evident by many, many stories. The more you learn about our ancestry, even in debunking what would be perceived as the submission Asian stereotype that exists and is imposed on us by American culture. We actually are living antithesis of that because of our over 300 years of resistance to colonial rule, our revolutionary history, and just the spirit of fierceness and joy and love that our ancestors have continued to embed in our DNA. So to trust ourselves, to trust our instincts, to be fearless and stay grounded in the roots that our ancestors have instilled with us here in this next generation. That's something that I wish I learned much younger.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. I mean, literally that last sentence right there was just like the theme of our event, right? That we stay grounded in the roots of our ancestors, what they sown. And we got to not doubt ourselves, because if we do that, you know, we doubt everything that has worked towards this moment, right? And so with that, I want to say thanks everyone for your questions, and thank you for those awesome answers. And with that, Lowell, you want to take us home?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, absolutely. And just want to give some further context. Thank you, Flo. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Gabe, for all your beautiful, wonderful answers, especially regarding the last question. You know, not to be too metaphorical, but I was the one who kind of came up with this design. And well, not to get too technical with plant biology, but you know, even though in times of darkness, when conditions are not the most optimal for growth, there is still opportunity for us to keep going and still develop and self-seize to eventually grow when times get better. So it really is a matter of kind of working together, and that can be able to lift each other up rather collectively. So this is just kind of some quick metaphors on, you know, the development of this design of the slide, if you will, related to this theme. All right. So given that, we're going to end up with some community announcements. The first being, if you've been keeping up with news related to what's been going on in New York City, not too long ago, current Philippine president Bongbong Marcos visited New York City, and there were many trials and tribulations that sort of happened during that time. But there were particular issues with the Aki-Beki New York City 3, and these folks right here, they were, of course, peacefully and non-violently expressing their concerns and voices. And whoops, skipped a little ahead. And we have developed a statement that you can find at the Afsa link tree, or whoever is going to be copy and pasting the Google form. So you can be able to read our solidarity statement. And if this is something that you can get behind, we invite you to write your name as a signatory for the Afsa solidarity statement to drop the charges against the Aki-Beki New York City 3. Also, another upcoming webinar announcement, we have a collaborative webinar event that is coming up. The Florida chapter for the Malaya Movement, Liang Network, and Kabataan Alliance will be having a educational discussion event titled Land is Life, a panel on the environmental conditions and resistances of indigenous peoples in the Philippines. And this is very, very opportune. October is Filipino American History Month. And there are certain aspects of our history that should be uplifted, such as those of Filipino indigenous peoples and the Filipino peasantry. And so we definitely encourage you to kind of come out for this event to see what members of the different organizations would definitely have to say on this matter. And if you're new to Afsa and would like to keep in touch, this is a good chance to take a screenshot of this slide right here. This QR code on the left, you use your phone, it will lead you to the Welcome to Afsa channel in Slack. And the QR code on the right is to fill out the Afsa membership form. And we especially use that to send emails and updates related to our Afsa programming. I definitely want to take this time to thank all of our speakers who took their time on a Saturday night to come out to this event and share us their wisdom, knowledge, and guidance. And on behalf of Afsa, I'd like to take the time for all of you for taking your time to sharing this anniversary, to learning from each other, and to celebrating our achievements and accomplishments. We hope you all take home new ideas and continue to be trailblazers in your fields. And we hope to continue to be inspired by the stories that we share to each other. And we also hope to see you in future events and potentially new collaborations. So definitely stay tuned. We have social media outlets for Afsa, as well as emails and the like. And at this point, after I stop talking, I am more than willing to let the Zoom room kind of open in case you want to have informal chatting. But other than that, if this is conclusive of the end of our event, and we'll be hanging around if anyone else wants to talk. But other than that, we wish you all a very good night and hope you'll take some time to soak in what you have learned today.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.